Hi, this is Steve Owens, and I'm lucky to have here today with me Bob Horn, who is a legend in the music
How's it
business.
going?
You real good. You really are a legend. You had the opportunity to work with Michael Jackson
Yeah.
and in his final recording stuff, and then you worked with BTS. And I've got so many young people that contact me. Can you get BTS
Oh,
on? Can you get BTS on? It's like, yeah, sure, no problem.
yeah.
And so tell me about working with Michael
Okay.
Jackson.
I was engineer for Nephew, whose real name is Ron Feemster or Theron Feemster. His nickname was Nephew, and I was his engineer day to day for 5 or 6 years, maybe starting in 2003. And he got contacted by Michael to work together around 2005, I want to say. So we worked with Michael off and on 2005, 6, and 7. And then when I branched off, stopped working for Nephew, went out on my own, I worked for Michael a couple more times up until almost 2009. And then he passed later in 2009. But yeah, I worked with him on and off. We had worked in Miami a bunch, Middle Ear Sound, which was Barry Gibb's studio in Miami. And then we built a studio with just a bunch of gear in a room in a house he had in Beverly Hills, and then worked a couple other random places through the years. But yeah, it wasn't like consistent. It would just be like 3 days this month, and then 2 weeks solid this month, and then but then we wouldn't hear from him for 5, 6 months, and then we'd be in Miami for a month, and then one day here, and it was really random. He was a sporadic guy with the schedule.
When working with him, how many layers of vocals did he normally put down on a record?
Not a lot. We He would usually have one main lead, and sometimes I'd have those split as verse and chorus, different sections, and then definitely 2 or 3 tracks of just ad libby vocal noises, beatbox kind of sounds. We would just run the track, and he would just sometimes just make noises that he felt rhythmically, and sometimes he wanted to keep those as vocals. Other times he wanted Nephew to turn those into rhythms, whether it was some kind of guitar part he was humming or more percussion that he heard that wasn't there yet. And then the backgrounds, it's a long time ago, but I want to say probably 16 to 24 tracks of backgrounds. Like it wasn't an insane amount like I've done with people like BTS or Brandy or anybody. It was less than you would expect from Michael, but they were all really tight, definitely strong. Like his backgrounds, they were purposeful. They weren't just sitting around in the back. Like when he backed himself up, it was strong.
When he was structuring the layout of the songs, did he start with the bass and the drums, or did he come up with his vocals, how he
The
wanted
way
to do
he
it?
worked with Nephew is he would just let us go loose making instrumentals. So we would spend many days making instrumentals, and we'd just turn them in. At the end of the day, I would rough mix like however 8 or 10 instrumentals we got done that day, and we'd just be feeding them to him, burning CDs and um, sending it to his people, and he would just be listening. And then when we got in the studio, he would phone ahead and tell us, "Hey, numbers 1, 6, and 9. Let's load those up. I have some ideas for those." But he more let Nephew just get creative, and he wanted to hear what Nephew came up with more than direct Nephew. But once Nephew got an idea that sparked something, then he might alter it and tell Nephew, "Hey, I like that. Let's just change this guitar to do this part." And so he liked to have the idea started already. And I don't know if that was just something he did only with Nephew or what, but Nephew was a track based producer. So we just cranked out track after track for all the artists we worked for. And they would just have a zillion to choose from. And then whatever they picked ended up being their records. That's the way he worked with Nephew, is jumping into ideas that already had a groove going.
With his vocals, was there a particular microphone that he gravitated towards, and was there any plugins that especially he liked to put on his vocals?
Well, back then, 2005 or 2007, the plugins were there weren't a zillion plugins like there are nowadays. He didn't really have a mind for what was going on with the computer. I don't think he cared that much. He just wanted to hear a good recording. But microphone wise, he definitely had his preferences, but it depended on the studio. When we were there's a writer that wrote with him a lot, Brad Buxer, and he had a M149, so we used that. In Miami, we used a U47 or SM7 I think that studio had the SM7B. And then I think there was, I don't know if it was Westlake or something. We might have used a C12, but I tried to use a U47 whenever we had it. And I thought that sounded great on him.
So you worked in Nashville for a
Yeah.
while, and did you find it hard making a transition from Nashville to Los
Uh,
Angeles?
when I look back on it, it was hard, but it just takes time getting stuff going in a new city. But what I did was when I left Nashville, I was an assistant and then very occasionally an engineer, but mostly an assistant. Then I spent a year in North Carolina and I worked with a bunch of different artists that were just in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, and James Brown and some other people. And I went there and saved up whatever money I could to move to California. And when I did, I just decided now that I'm here, I'm not going to go get a job at a studio. I'm not going to assist again. I'm just going to declare myself an engineer and try to meet people and work with them. And that's what I did. And I, the funny thing is, I was flying to New York to work more than I was working in LA, probably the first year, with some producer friends I knew. So that kind of kept me afloat, uh, paying my rent and stuff. And then I started to meet people out here slowly. I had a couple friends, and they would and try to introduce me to people. But it took probably about a year to get going out here, and it wasn't. I guess it was just difficult in the waiting time. That it took that long a time to meet people and start get regular gigs where I could support myself. But other than that, it wasn't too difficult.
What do you see the difference between country mixing and, say, pop mixing these days?
Not a lot. I don't know. So much country is almost pop, and a lot of it is even done by people that work in pop regularly, producers and engineers. But when I was in Nashville, country was very much country. You had the Shania Twains and other stuff, but you had to have, as an engineer, you had to have a grasp of recording acoustic instruments, whether it was banjo, mandolin, high strung acoustic, and then of course all the other instruments, bass guitar, drums, and everything. But and it was a way that we recorded in Nashville. It was very, you start at 10 a.m. There's no fooling around. You might track the basics for a whole album in one day and then start in the overdubs for the next 3 4 days and then work on the overdubs for maybe 2 weeks and then it would go to mixing. But so it's very structured, regimented, and people were session musicians were most commonly hired in Nashville, and they had time schedules, so there was no messing around. It was very regimented and very structured. And yeah, I don't know when it comes to the country music nowadays, I think it's more produced like pop, where you might have a violin or definitely acoustic guitar, maybe some country elements in the song that lets country along with the person's voice and the sound of their voice. Um, but otherwise, a lot of it is so much of it is programming and done like pop records. When it comes to the mixing, I think if you have the knowledge of mixing live instruments, any kind of small country element that might be in a modern country song, you can handle. I don't know if there's a whole lot of difference. So many of these country artists, their records sound like hit pop records. If you muted the violin and changed the banjo to electric guitar and changed the voice to a different artist, it could be a pop song.
Yeah. You've worked with a lot of artists over the years. What have been some of the highlights from different artists?
Um, Definitely Michael. We never I never had a release with Michael because he passed before the album that would have been, I don't know if he was going to title the album This Is It, but I know the tour was called This Is It, and he had passed, so I never got a release with Michael. But definitely the learning that took place with him working alongside Nephew during that time was definitely paramount. Some of the other early highlights, uh, seeing a few artists like NDRE or Neo go from non-famous to famous was definitely a treat and a learning experience. Watching Neo was a demo singer, a songwriter, but also laid the demo vocals for records for Mario. So we were working with Mario and turning in records, and then Mario would come in and replace Neo's vocals. And that's how I believe Neo got discovered over at Def Jam, because his vocals were so great on those records. And in fact, when we got to mixing Mario, the A&R would tell me, mix in some of Neil's backgrounds for support because they sounded so good. He was writing but laying down the vocals himself. So watching that process of an artist who's a songwriter wants to be an artist and he's gaining traction writing for big artists, but he all of a sudden gets a deal on his own, and watching that happen was really cool. And there are a lot of great people out there. It's cool. And there's so many personalities in the music business. Usher was another one, working with the Avila Brothers and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. The thing is, I learn so much from my clients and the making of those records. I'm just like a sponge, and it's just like building an encyclopedia of production techniques and watching these guys go. So it's just an honor for me to be able to learn from these guys while I'm getting paid to work as well.
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall with Jimmy
Oh
Jam and
man,
Terry Lewis.
they're,
So I know the BTS Army is going to get mad at me if I don't ask you some questions
oh
about
sure.
them. So tell me about when you're recording a boys group. How do you record so many people? Did you do it all at
I
once, or
only
are
I only
you
mixed for BTS. I didn't record them. My
okay?
partner did, Eric, my partner in the studio. He recorded them, and I can tell you how I would approach it. But for BTS specifically, I really only mixed them. So I dealt with all of their vocals, but they were already recorded.
When you got the vocals, were they on separate tracks
Oh
or
yeah,
were
mini
they
tracks, and thankfully BTS and a lot of the K-pop groups, but especially BTS, they're very organized with their files. So when you get the folder, it's all broken down. So you got drum folder, percussion folder, bass folder, synth folder, guitar folder, and then when you get to the vocals, they're listed by singer, but also for the leads. And then there's ad lib folder, there's a background folder, there's a gang vocal folder for any like kind of shout group vocals. So everything's labeled really well. But it still doesn't speed up the process at all because you're talking about probably 120 tracks of vocals on a lot of these songs. When you got 7 members, they all have leads, they all have backgrounds, they all have doubles, they all have harmonies. It I take about an hour going through those files and learning what's there for me to work with.
Mhm.
And then I mix the leads with the track and I save all the backgrounds for later because it's just a daunting amount of vocals and they're just support. So I get the lead sounding great. And the biggest trick is to get all of them matching because they it seems like they all use the same mic maybe, and that's not for every voice. There's a perfect mic out there in the world, and who knows what it is. But when you put them all on the same mic, there'll be a little bit of EQing to get them to match, to get Suga to match Jimin. All those voices, they all have their own timbres, and while they're similar, they're in the same age group. They're all male. There's still some differences on the mic. So I think the biggest thing with them is getting it all to match seamless. So when you hit play on the record, it goes section to section, and it all sounds even and cohesive and great.
So speaking of sessions and getting it, and they're very well organized. How many times have you received sessions that were a disaster?
Oh,
Figure out the plugins.
well,
You couldn't figure out anything on
definitely
it.
not from BTS, but there's definitely artists I've received just some horrendous stuff. The biggest thing is things that are missing, being given the wrong session, but being told it's the right session. So I mix the whole thing, turn it in, and then they go, "Oh, that's the wrong version." Like stuff like that. It's like in this unlabeled, unorganized mess, or they have the vocals but not the beat, and they can't find the guy who has the beat, or he can't find his own beat because it was too many months ago. I've done stuff recently where they couldn't find the separated beat tracks, and the guy no longer had it on his system. So we had to take the 2-track stereo music and use AI to separate drums, bass, keys, and mix it that way. And
Yeah, yeah.
it was very iffy.
I tell you for the separation and that the best program that I've actually found on it because I tried them pretty much all of them playing around with songs is the FL Studio has the
Oh,
best
really?
separation in it.
That's good to know. I used Moises AI, and
Okay.
that was fairly
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
But hopefully, I won't have
Mhm.
to do that again, or not too many times. But
Exactly.
yeah, there's definitely I started in '98, so however many years that is. I've definitely witnessed some craziness. I went in to help a producer one time recreate an entire album that he never saved on his MPC, but he had the bounces, the 2-track bounces of the beats, and he needed to recreate it. So we went in and listened sound by sound, and we were going through all his patches. Like, wait, that's the shaker. Okay, that's the right shaker. Okay, where's the right bass? Okay, that's the right bass. Just sound by sound, and we had to recreate an entire album. And so I've seen some disasters over the years.
So you've got quite a few plaques up on the wall. I know that from different projects. What are some of your favorites that you've received?
Probably, let's see, BTS goes without saying. Timbaland is another great one. That's someone I always wanted to work with, and I got a chance to mix on his Shock Value album. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah, that was with a producer friend of mine, Walter Millsap. He got, I guess, co-produced on that with Timbo. But he was such a great guy when I talked to him on the phone. I didn't work with him in the studio because he was on tour with Timberlake for the album Justin had just released, which might have been the Sexy Back, the one, the album that was on. Trying to
Mhm.
the timeline, but that and then Usher. I'm looking this way because that's where all the plaques are. Akon was cool. That was definitely a very cool experience. And the first time I got a song on a video game, it was the first edition of Xbox. Um, and there was this boxing game called Fight Night, and it was the startup screen game song. And the most hilarious thing because it had so many cuss words in it because it was a rap song, and they were all
Yeah, yeah.
muted, but there were hardly any words left. It was almost an instrumental because so many cuss words were in it. So that was pretty awesome. Um, yeah, and I have a bunch of plaques for BTS and Brian Culverton. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's been a ride. Definitely a fun ride so far.
Did you get a chance to work in the analog days and in Nashville and then move over
I
to
I
digital?
caught that most of my analog experience was actually in school, and then when I got to Nashville, only a handful of sessions were analog tape, except for as far as the multi-track. As far as printing, a lot of mixers would print a half inch, so I got experience with that. But for as far as the 24 track or 48 track, a lot of the guys in Nashville, there were so many digital formats. There was reel to reel. There was Sony 3348. There was the Mitsubishi 32 track, and then there was the newer thing at that time was the Otari Radar, and so there was so much in Nashville that had already gone digital. It just wasn't Pro Tools, we know, with the keyboard and mouse. It was still like a tape machine, and there was
Yeah,
only
yeah.
two in 98 to 2001 when I was there. There was only two guys in town with Pro Tools rigs that were no, I'm sure some people had it at their houses that we didn't know about, but there was two
Yeah,
guys
yeah.
that you would call in to do vocal tuning. So they'd wheel in their Pro Tools rig, big, massive Pro Tools rig in cases. You'd set them up in the lounge and feed them a SMPTE cable and AES cable from the control room, and you'd send them the lead vocal and the two track, and they would tune all day in the lounge. And then when they were done, they would send you the lead vocal back tuned. And that was as much as Nashville was using Pro Tools until probably 2002 or three after I had left. And when I got out to LA, it seemed to be all Pro Tools and maybe a little bit of analog, but I only caught a few years of analog.
I read online that you actually teach classes. Are you still doing that?
I do courses sometimes. I had taught a couple classes at Berkeley, just like one offs or for a couple of weeks, not as enrolled as a teacher. But yeah, I'd like to do more videos. I want to get set up here at the house where I could film some courses on my own and then edit them in my free time if I could find some free time. Because a lot of people have liked the courses I've done for Produce a Pro, which is Warren Hewart's channel, and I get
Hmm.
requests for more of those. But I'd like to maybe do a bunch of videos on my own if I can deal with that versus also mixing. But yeah, I think I want to do it again at some point. I definitely like to do seminars and stuff like that.
Do you have any go-to plugins for every session that you do?
Oh yeah, I have. I counted. I have about 60 plugins I use regularly, and probably 10 that I use a lot. But the Make Believe bundle, which are plugins from Rick Carson, and they're made by Metrica Halo. They have some phenomenal plugins. They have a great EQ, a couple great EQs, a good channel strip. They have the Mix Head plugin, which just is nominated for a Tech Award this year. So hopefully they win that. Of course, the good old Fab Filter Pro Q. I just got the Isotope Plasma, which I can see that's going to be a go to. That thing's really cool. But yeah, I have a bunch that I use regularly. Gold Clip, Isotope, Ozone 11. It's funny, we have so many plugins now that sometimes it's hard to remember them all. But I don't know,
Today.
sometimes I just have to ignore my friends when they say, "Hey, did you try this plugin?" I don't even want to know about it right now. It's like I'll buy a plugin
Uh,
and then I'll use it that one day I bought it, and then I'll forget about it, and I'll discover it months later. Oh yeah, I bought this and I never put it to use. It's just because people tell me, "Go buy this, go buy that." It's so bad.
so what advice would you give young artists in prepping to go into a recording studio or sending you the mixes so they're closer to being in the A level versus being a real
Well,
independent?
the best thing to prep as far as recording is to just have your stuff together, and that means the song. It's like you don't want to go in there and waste time. I've seen so many artists, young artists, that go in and it becomes like this. They're almost too excited to be there, and they end up doing a bunch of pictures for Instagram, and they don't even start recording for 2 hours, and their friends show up, and then that's wasting time because the friends keep talking and asking questions. And being rehearsed is probably the thing that lacks the most that I see in the studio. Back when I first started out, people would come into the studio and they would know the songs inside and out. They'd remember the lyrics. They wouldn't need a lyric sheet. And nowadays, you see people, they're just on their phones with the lyrics and they're reading while they're trying to deliver a performance. And that's very hard to do. When you're reading, you're not thinking about what the emotion of the words and what it means. It's a definite talent to deliver a song in an amazing, captivating way. So to hinder yourself by having to read lyrics off of a piece of paper or your phone it's very detrimental. And the biggest example I could help people relate to is when someone comes by my studio and says, "Hey, I want you to check out this new singer I'm managing," and they'll have them sing something like their favorite Whitney Houston or Mariah Carey, and you hear them do all the runs, and they've sung it 1,000 times in the shower, and for their grandparents and their aunts and uncles, and maybe even performed it a couple times live. And then you ask them to sing something original, and it's horrendous. It doesn't sound good. It's not performed well. They forget the lyrics, and the reason is they're passionate about that Whitney Houston song, that Mariah song, and they've sung it over and over again. But when it comes to their own material, they don't put that passion into it. So they just rely on tuning and editing and the engineer to help them make it sound good. And I never understood that as singers. Like, why don't they put the practice amount into their craft and their songs that they're about to sing in the studio? Because a studio recording, if you release it, it's forever. Everyone's going to hear it. It's not like you were on stage, you hit one out of tune note, and everyone's going to forget because they're drinking and it's live. When you lay it down on recording, it's forever. So why not make it sound incredible? Why not wait a week, practice it, rehearse it, memorize it, get it to the point where when you sing those lyrics, you're injecting the meaning and some soul into it. If it's a sad song, you inject some feeling of sadness into it rather than just read it off the paper and then I'll tune it with Melodyne or Autotune and it's done.
Yeah.
The downfall of most young artists in the studio is that right there. They're so excited because they just got a beat that's amazing, or they just finished writing the last lyric and they love it so much they got to get in that booth. And I always want to tell people, no, wait, take it home, hang out with it for 3 days, practice it in the car while you're driving to work or whatever, come back and then make it awesome. And every time I've been able to convince an artist to do that, it's always been great when they come back. And the second part of your question was mixing. The best way to be prepared is to make sure you're done with the production. Make sure you've made your decisions. And that's the one bad part about all this advanced technology we have with the computers is you can always leave stuff to decide later. It's like I have these 10 vocal takes and I don't know if I like this one better or that one, but let's put that one for now, and then I have the others later if I want to switch it. In my mind, go ahead and make that decision. The sooner you make those decisions and commit to them, the stronger the record is going to be, the stronger the process is going to be. If you take the whole record making process and you're indecisive the whole way, you're going to come out with something you're unsure of, and that's not good at all. So I just think being prepared with your record and your decisions and knowing what you want. And when you go to the mixer, make sure you're hiring the right guy, a guy that has a sound you like. Make sure you've listened to his records and you like what he does. Yeah, that's probably the best advice I can give. Make sure your producers have given you all the files. I've had singers that just don't know the technical world show up with an MP3 wanting me to mix. It's, no, we need the files from the producer who made the music. Where did you get the music from? And then we have to go down and chase that down. So just knowing, taking a little time to know the jargon of the studio world and how it all works and who has what files and who's responsible for providing those for you, and just preparedness. That's the best thing.
One of the things that I notice is, and the stuff that I get sent is that over
Mm-hmm.
compression and burning the compression in on the vocals where you can't turn around and actually fix those
For
records
sure.
with what they've
Yeah.
done.
Yeah, man, you nailed it. There's definitely people that will just smash the heck out of, especially vocals, and they'll. What's worse is they'll do it on a vocal where the reverb's already burned in, so now your reverb's getting funny and fluttery and weird, and you can't undo it. And they give it to you to mix, and they want it to sound just as good as their idols on the radio. And man, they don't realize that they give you that stuff. They burn it in because they're paranoid about a mix engineer changing it, but or they're either that or they just don't know and they do it by accident. But sometimes producers will burn that stuff in, not wanting you to change it, but not realizing they're handicapping us, you know. So
Yeah, I always tell them that having programmed radio, whatever you send me on a record, I'm going to add a DBX 160 on the chain an AFAX Sorrel exciter to make it the loudest on the dial. So don't go crazy on the compression because I'm going to add
right, right.
it. And that's what all the radio stations do. They add stuff onto the chain,
Mm-hmm.
so it's getting a double whammy on the compression on
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
What is what is your favorite genre that you want to continue to mix in?
um Man, it's funny. Like I'm a guy that spans so many genres, and I don't know. I guess that it's my own choice, but people just seek me out from bunch of different genres. Like I have friends that only mix hip hop or only work in pop, but I work on country pop, K-pop, smooth jazz, hip hop, trap, and I don't know. I want to keep them all going because I enjoy the mental break. So if I work on hip hop all week and then I get a pop song, that's like a refresh and a mind reset. And then next week I might get a trap song, and then the next day a country song with trap drums on it. And if I had to pick one, it'd probably be pop because it encapsulates so much and it can vary so much. So that would give me the widest breadth of sonic possibilities and artistry. But I love it all, man. Like I love Fiasco, and then work on something, some moody pop ballad. I love it
Mhm.
all.
And the last question for you is, how many 4 chord songs have you
Four
done?
chord song, man. I have no idea. Probably a zillion. Right.
Oh, where can people find you in social media, Bob?
So everything's just Bob Horn mixing. Real easy. BOBHORN. Um, yeah, easy.
And you have a website that they can book sessions through?
Yeah, my manager's on my website, bobhornmixing.com, but I have so many people they'll just reach out on Instagram and ask me how they can collab with me, and other people on Facebook. So just any of those venues, website, Instagram, it's all good.
Fantastic. Man, I appreciate you being here
Yeah,
today.
of course.
Great knowledge you're passing on.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.